Welcome to the session this afternoon. I'm Sheila Carey, and I'm chairing this panel. The panel is called You Can't Handle the Truth, Understanding Ourselves and Our Audiences, and I'm not going to try to do the Jack Nicholson imitation on that one. The first presentation will be called Help Wanted, In Search of the Right Evaluator, and that will be Kate Tinworth. Second will be Ideas for Museums, a biography of museum computing, Anna Mikhailova. And then we have Martha Henson and Tiana Tasik from the Tate Gallery. And I would like to have questions afterwards so that we make sure that everyone gets their full time. And just a reminder, the session is being recorded, and you can use the MCN2013 hashtag, and I have put everybody's Twitter names on there as well for you. So we'll start with Kate.
So, like I said, thanks for coming to a session about evaluation voluntarily, or at least being here early enough to see these other wonderful women who are not going to present about the same thing, but it's all related. First of all, I wanted to just let you know that for me, this isn't just about evaluation. That's my lens. Can you on this side see past my head? Is it all right? Okay. Looks like I'm sort of blocking it. Good. It could be for any consultant. So kind of keep that in mind. My lens is evaluation. That's what I do full time. But the more I thought about this and the more I've been listening to presentations over the last couple of days, I realized this talk could really apply to any time that you're thinking about hiring someone outside of your organization to help you out with anything. So keep that in mind. It's definitely going to focus on evaluation, on who you might consult within that role, but I think it's broader than that. And what I mean by evaluation is also quite broad for the purposes of today. I mean, it could be a traditional visitor study. It could be user testing. It could be learning research. It's really any way that we're getting intel about our audiences to help us make informed decisions. So when I talk about evaluation, it means all of those things. So the first thing I want to do is kind of figure out who's in the audience. I'm an evaluator, right? You're not going to get out of this session without being asked a few questions. That's impossible for me. I also just want to make sure that I spend my next 15 minutes or so wisely to make sure I get your questions answered. So for those of you that actually are here because you want to hear a little bit about hiring an evaluation consultant or working with an evaluator, why did you choose this session? Why are you here? What can I make sure I answer for you? Okay, I'm feeling good. Thanks for that. I'll tell you a little bit about me and why I decided to do this. I love this conference, so I'll just say that. I love getting into this side of my brain. Some of my favorite projects to work on are mobile projects and digital media projects, and it doesn't happen a lot. It does happen usually in the context of grants, and so that's how we usually get pulled in, but I'm sort of sick of it, so I'm here because I'm a little pissed off. I'm a little annoyed. I love my work. I think that nothing is cooler than data. I'm a total stats geek. But I think more importantly, this is a way to make what we do smarter, better informed. It makes our work more beautiful. But what I hear a lot is that this is something that people either actively hate or passively dismiss. And so I'm super passionate about it. I want that passion to catch on a little bit. So that's why I'm here. And I have a small little in-house shop that's just me. It's just me. So when you hear Exposure Museum, that's just Kate. I used to be at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I led the internal evaluation department there for 6 years. So I definitely have that inside a large cultural institution lens. But since 2010, I've been consulting, and then I just started doing it full-time just earlier this year in the spring. So I'm now in Durham, North Carolina, and loving it and working with clients all over the place, mostly art museums these days and mostly on tech projects. So I have a really warm spot in my heart for coming to a conference like this and hearing about all of your awesome work. So I mentioned, I get it. People either usually actively hate or passively ignore a lot of the stuff that goes on in evaluation or wait till they have a grant and have to use it. And I get it. And here's why I get it. There are some key statistics for you. 98% of evaluation reports make me sleepy. 3% of evaluation reports get put to use, to your point. 50% of the time, right project, wrong evaluator, and 100% of the time, I make up statistics to prove my point. So I get it. I get why it's frustrating, and that's, it's tongue-in-cheek, sure, but you have options, and I think that it's hard to know what they are, and people don't talk about what my field does very transparently. There's a lot of sort of cloak and dagger that goes on. It seems competitive. It seems like people pick people they know rather than people who are the best for the job, and so I want you to know you have a choice, and I'm going to walk you through some of them. So here's your first choice, right? And what I hear at this conference is you all are doing it yourself, and that makes me happy. My advice to you, keep doing it. Don't stop. You're all evaluators. It's not unique to someone that you call in to do the work. There are some real benefits to doing it yourself. One, you can in theory start today. So you don't have to wait for a grant. You don't have to wait for the funding. You can start today. You know your environment. You know your project. You understand the organizational climate. You know the players. Maybe you're even more trusted, right? People know who you are because you're an insider. And every time you do it, you're likely to get better at doing it. So I never discourage people from doing evaluation internally, even if that's not the background they come from. We all evaluate all the time, and I keep hearing wonderful examples of that happening at this conference. On the other hand, it can be time consuming. If it's not your job, then it's added on to your job. And time being carved out to do this can be really challenging. It's on top of everything else that you already do, right? And you might not have the internal staff that have the tools or the resources to do it. You might just not have the level of skill set to know what to do and how to do it. So there are benefits that come with an outsider too, right? It might be good to have external perspective. That can be good. Someone who's not so close to the project, absolutely. Sometimes outsiders can get information you can't. Sometimes the opposite happens, and people will talk to someone external before they'll talk to someone internal. External can sometimes be perceived as more credible, especially for the grants that some of you talked about. And oftentimes you're hiring someone because they have the experience or training that you might not have in-house. So, that's fine. And sometimes it's not optional. Sometimes grant organizations and foundations will require you to use someone external. So even if it's the case where you could do it, sometimes it's not allowed. So what are the bad things about this? External can be really expensive, right? You know this. Depending on the size and scope, it can really break the bank in several ways. And just because that you're paying them doesn't mean you're off the hook. Like, you still have a lot to do. And those of you who have worked with external evaluators, you kind of have to do some hand-holding. And for some of them, you have to do a lot of hand-holding. It really depends on who you hire. So it doesn't really get you off the hook for managing them, getting them what they need, getting them up to speed, that sort of thing. So an approach I really like is more of a hybrid approach, where you have an external evaluator who will work with you to really build your internal capacity, someone who will come and train you, especially in the ways that you want to be trained, and really mobilize your internal staff to do some of the data collection. Another reason I love that, not only does it kind of mix both approaches, but I think it increases the buy-in. Like, if you're collecting the data and you're seeing what's happening with visitors, if you're out on the floor talking to people, or if you're doing the user testing, you have a bigger stake in it. You're seeing it for yourself. And so I really encourage people to do this sort of mixed thing. Also, then when your external evaluator goes away, you can keep doing the work. You don't have to stop. You've built your skill set. It really prevents thinking of it as this one-off study where it's just for a grant, or it's just for one particular component, or one particular exhibit, or one particular mobile. So I really like it in that way. Also, you can have them do the heavy lifting in areas you don't like to do, which is cool too. Like, you can do the parts you want, and you can sort of offload the parts that you don't like. And that might be like creating an instrument, getting a really strong instrument, or having them do the analysis or the report writing. So again, I think it's great to build ownership, and it can also bring down costs. So that's not bad. Okay, so say at this stage, because you're time crunched, or you want to build capacity, or you have a grant, you decide you want an external evaluator or someone to help you, at least one on hand, so that when you have an upcoming grant application, or you know that pretty soon you're going to have something that needs evaluation, you want to have them to work with when the time's right. So I recommend you start with audience. Think about who cares, and I mean the audience for your evaluation. Who are your internal stakeholders that care? Is it your senior leadership team? Is it your education staff? Is it a group of curators? Because that is really going to influence who you want to pick. Different evaluators can talk to these different stakeholders in the right way, or not at all the right way. And so you want someone who really can speak to your audience. I think another thing is thinking about who's going to use these results moving forward. Thinking about who's going to actually actionize these things is going to really help you pick the evaluation person that you want to work with. Another thing that's essential before you even start thinking of who is thinking about what we really want to learn and why. You don't have to worry about asking the specific questions or wording things correctly. That's what the person you hire should do, but just really lay it out. And that could be in a theory of change. You could do a user experience map, but putting on paper kind of what you want to know and where the holes are. And you can do that, for some of you that heard Douglas at the beginning, you can do that for your whole institution. You might want to make it a bit broader than just for this new exhibit or just for this study. The bigger you can make it, the more you can identify the places where you need information, the better, because you can have it be more holistic. So, what questions do you need the answers to now, and which ones are you really going to use? Don't ever, ever, ever just promise me you'll never ask a visitor or any member of an audience something that you will not use. If you ask gender, you better have a reason to use gender. Like, It's the kind of thing we see all the time. If you ask what age people are on a survey, you better have a reason for it. Like, what are you going to do? Otherwise, eliminate those questions so you can really refine. Think about it this way, too. What's going to be lost if you don't evaluate? Like, what's really missing? It'll help you figure out the best way to get it done and the best person to do it. So you've done that work. Who do I choose? So a huge mistake I see happening over and over again, and I've done it, is just going with a name you've heard or someone you've seen present at a conference. So keep this in mind. I made this mistake, and you'd think that I know better, right? But I don't know better. I chose someone I really like, someone that professionally I really enjoyed seeing them present, that I'd seen them at conferences. We'd gone out, casually with groups like you do at conferences. We had a lot of fun over drinks. I thought it was the right fit. Bad choice. Not the right fit for that particular evaluation. Doesn't mean their evaluation skills are flawed, but it wasn't the right fit, and you have a choice. There are a ton of evaluators and consultants out there, and they're all really different. So at the end, I'm going to give you some specific resources that you can use. But I want you to just start thinking about this and think about making a short list. There should never be one evaluator you use for everything, or one that you just love for every reason. I can tell you the good ones will also say to you, this is an awesome project, I'm not the right fit. And we should be able to turn you away and turn you on to someone else, because we all have different skill sets. So you'll want to know more than one. Here are some things I recommend you asking. It's not unlike a job interview. Evaluators aren't all the same, so if you can locate a few that you think sound interesting, ideally call them up or get them on Skype. Skype's best. Get them face-to-face. Don't take email for an answer. You need to see this person. You need to have a conversation with this person. If you can do it in person, if you live near them, fantastic. Ask them what they love. Ask them about some of their most memorable experiences as an evaluator, their favorite studies, and what methods they use. When I was in the CMA session yesterday about Gallery 1, there was really good advice given about using a combination of methods, not getting stuck on just one. Otherwise, you kind of get in a rut of only seeing audience through one lens. And so ask them about that. Like, what are different methods you might want to use? Let's talk about this. If you really want to build capacity, ask them how they do that. How are you going to train our internal staff? What can you give us back in that way? Ask about philosophy. What do you care about? What are your passions? Ask them how they deal with change, because things are going to change in the course of whatever you're working on. Ask them how they deal with creativity and innovation. And I'm not saying do this to stump them. Just do it because you want the right evaluator, you want the right fit. So do that homework. The next thing you got to think about is your role. What do you really want to do? I mentioned this before. You might want to take a really strong role. You might want to be super involved. You also might just want them to show up and get it done. If you just want them to show up and get it done, that's a different type of evaluator. So think about that. If you want to be trained by them and sort of have them as a mentor, again, you're going to pick someone different. So think about your role. It's something that I think is just as important as thinking about what they might do. Plan. So this is something that I think needs to be more than just the noun, the plan on paper. You need to keep planning, keep tweaking, change it all the time. It'll pull in so many things at the beginning that you don't have to then think about later. Of course, you have to adjust it, but putting the time to plan in the beginning for your evaluation is huge. Yesterday, there was a Beyond the Visitor survey session that I went to, and there was this discussion about senior leadership and how you sell them on evaluation. And this came up earlier when I was asking you why you were here. So showing senior leadership a plan about actually how you're going to fill holes and how you're going to answer questions that can't be answered any other way than by audience is going to help convince them of that. You got to tell them how you're going to use it. It can't be shelved. If it collects dust in a 3-ring binder, it's a bad evaluation. If you have something visually interesting that you have posted in your cubicle and you look at it every day, that's a good evaluation. So you got to think about that too in terms of how you're planning. Plan early, and it can save you immensely. I read something really cool recently about user testing and that it pays off 100-fold in terms of the financial investment, and I can give you more information on that. But anyone who needs to convince senior leadership, it's all about this planning stage and being really articulate about the holes that you're filling and how you're going to put it to use. So care and feeding. I referenced this a little bit, but I can't tell you. So I used to be internal, and I would have external evaluators come in all the time for big projects, and I would just be like, kind of, go ahead, yeah, do your thing. I got to do my thing. See you later. Now that I'm a consultant, I can't tell you how wonderful it is when I come to a new building I've never been to before, and someone offers me a bottle of water and gives me an empty desk to sit at and shows me where the bathrooms are. I was terrible about that when I was internal, and so care and feeding's huge for any consultant you work with, right? But it's the little things that make a huge difference. So planning for that, planning to let them know where the local lunch spots are, it makes a huge difference. It's something to think about. People always ask about costs, so let's just talk about it. It really depends. It depends on, how experienced they are, how many published books and articles they have, and just who they are as a person. It can range from as low as like $50 for a grad student to anywhere in $200 to $300 an hour, depending on who you hire. So it really, really ranges. But what I'd say is most evaluators will work with you on this. If you tell them your price point, they'll reverse engineer it and they'll let you know realistically what they can do for you. I don't know any evaluator, I've never met one in our field, who I feel is trying to rip someone off. Like, they are kind people who understand our world. So I know it can feel really expensive, but have them walk you through it. Have them provide you a menu of things that they can offer to you, and ask upfront about cost. If they can't tell you or won't tell you, that's a problem. They should be able to talk about that openly. Sex, religion, and politics are not off the table when you're hiring a consultant, as far as I'm concerned. Don't ask me about some of this, but you get the idea. So models, this is really important. These are different ways you can think about working with an evaluator or any consultant. You can just pick one. And if you do that, we've talked about that. Ask around, ask them a lot of questions, ask who your favorite colleagues have worked with before. Don't just go with the name you've heard, but actually ask some questions. And what were the experiences that your colleagues had? Were they good? Were they bad? What did they love? What did they hate? You can do an RFP, and I have some resources at the end about how to do one well. Definitely having a chance to get a lot of proposals in and weigh them can be incredibly beneficial, so that can be great. But the hard thing about RFPs is the time and energy they take. And also that they're a little bit of a shot in the dark. You don't want to give people too much information because you want to keep it open, but then it ends up being so open that you get bids that are like all over the map. And so it's really hard to do. There are some strategies, and again, I'll give you resources. But at least then maybe you can have a pool of people you might want to work with in the future. So IDIQ means indefinite duration, indefinite quantity, sometimes quality. Indefinite duration, indefinite quantity. What I love about this is this means you can hire someone and you do it, you get all their paperwork done, their contract and their W-9 or whatever you need paperwork-wise, and you have them on hold, and you can call them in for projects as you need them. So you've done all the front-end work to get them sort of within your budget lines, but you might want to keep them for when the project most makes sense to them. So I've seen this happen in smaller museums, and I think it's been really successful, where people will have about 4 evaluators, and then when something comes up, say a new web redesign project comes up, they already know someone who they think is a good fit for that. They call them up, the paperwork's all done, they can move a little faster. So that can be a really interesting approach. And then the retainer model is really great as well. Again, this is good for smaller institutions, or if you don't have an evaluation budget, you can say, hey, I've got $5,000. Can I hold you, evaluator I've picked, with this $5,000, give it to you up front or into a couple of chunks, and then spend it down as I need it. So then you could call someone and say, hey, I'm doing user testing and I'm stuck on these questions. I need a couple hours of your time. I don't need you to come, but I need like $1,000 worth of your time to get through it. And so that sort of model can be really fantastic. It's also really good when you're working on a grant proposal and you need like a logic model, or you need them to review your evaluation plan. Just being able to know you can call them when you need them, but you're not spending a whole lot of money. You're getting advice. It's kind of like having someone that's on the other end of a tech support line, except for evaluation. So that works really well. And they can fit it in between their larger gigs. So I've found that most evaluators are really open to this model as well. So I'm going to wrap up with telling you that I have some resources on exposuremuseum.com. There's a section you'll see that's called the Non-Evaluators Toolkit. And I tried to put as many things as I could think of on there to help you all out. There's Find an Evaluator databases. I put some for pretty much every country I thought was going to be here to point you in the right direction, because there are evaluators outside of the museum sector that are awesome and you should look at. For a lot of you, it might make more sense to have a mobile consultant or a user experience designer or usability tester. So, think broadly. And then truthfully, just to be completely honest, many museum evaluators don't have the skill sets or passion around some of your work. So ask questions about that, like, do you do traditional visitor studies, or do you do what I'm doing? Make sure they share your passion and that they can overlap, because there are some out there. And then really just to wrap up with the point I've been making this whole time is it's really about asking the right questions to get the right fit. Start early. Evaluators who are awesome book well in advance, and you know this, so please don't call us like 5 days before your proposal's due. We're used to it, but we don't love it. We want to work with you from the beginning. We want to get to know you and build that relationship. So I'm all done. We're going to save questions to the end, but thanks to those of you who came to listen about evaluation voluntarily. You're awesome.
Thank you, Sheila, and everyone who come to this session today. I'd like to continue discussion which started yesterday. at the session called The Future of the Digital Departments and talk about people who work at these departments in different museums in different countries. And I'd like to start by introducing you people that you won't see today. This is my team with whom I work on my project. They are all from St. Petersburg, Russia, and interestingly, they are not museum people. So they are designers, programmers, translators, and not museum people. Yes, but luckily, we've been working together for more than a year now, and thank you for their support. And I also would like to dedicate this talk to Alexander Dimailov, who passed away this October. He was one of the museum pioneers in Russia who implemented first computers in Russian museums in the early 19th. And he was one of the first Russian museum professionals who attended conferences here in Canada and in the US. So my project is entitled Ideas for Museums, a Biography of Museum Computing, and these two parts of title have special meaning. So the word biography means that I'm looking at the history of the museum computerization. And the word ideas refers to those parts of interviews which are about thoughts which museum professionals share with me about the current situation in the museum sector and some predictions about the future. And while museums are trying to digitize collections, I'm trying to digitize professionals. It can sound weird, but I think that it can be useful somehow. So usually one interview takes from half an hour to 1 hour, and then I edit it and upload 10-15 minutes video on the official YouTube channel. Yes, I know that people don't like watching long videos, and I know that it's better to upload 2 minutes video, but still it's not enough for my project. And my project also has a website where you can find transcripts, translations, because most interviews are in Russian, as well as find some additional information and useful links. At the moment, since last November, I've recorded 29 interviews, and some of them are still being edited and translated. And special for this conference, I conducted a survey, what makes a museum technologist. The idea of this survey was based on the survey which was done by Rob Stein and Rich Cherry for Museums and the Web conference, which took place in April this year. But I added some other questions, and basically questions in this survey and in my interviews were the same. So questions could be divided into 3 groups: background information, career, and the future. And I'll start discussing the background groups of questions. Of course, I was interested in some factual information such as age, country, and academic degree that people have. But I also wanted to look at some childhood memories, dreams, for example, about career. And this was quite interesting because most of the people with whom I talked, and it's around 50 people, only 2 of them really wanted to work in a museum when they were a child. That's interesting. So yes, I got a lot of standard answers such as policemen, pilots, etc. But at the same time, I got some really interesting one. Someone wanted to be a wise old woman, a time traveler that can quite work in the museum, and even a Q-bird. And also, which was really interesting, that people who came to the museum for the first time, they didn't work with technology. They began their careers as curators, tour guides, or they were just, not just, they were technical people, but they just were looking for a job anywhere. And surprisingly for me, a major part of respondents got their first job in the museum randomly, just because they needed a job. And now I'd like to share with you the first video. It was really interesting for me to know, do you remember your first visit to a museum? And you can keep this question in mind and try to come up with your own thoughts. And so this video was recorded with Ross Perry, who is the senior lecturer at the University of Leicester, and now we can see it.
Yeah, so the first visit to a museum, I do know what it is. I do know what it is. And it's interesting because it's also one of my first memories. So that's quite a powerful thing. But one of the first things I remember as a child is also my first sort of memory of a museum. I've never really reflected on that before. But I was about 3. And just 3, I think. And because we lived very close to London, my parents were brilliant at taking us, me and my brother, to museums all the time. So my childhood is punctuated with these fantastic memories of being taken to all the museums in London in every holiday and summer holiday and so on. And the first memory of going to a museum was the Natural History Museum. And what I remember, and I can close my eyes and see it now, which is extraordinary, really, was seeing not an original specimen, not a sort of formally accessioned object, but it was seeing the big blue whale. And I guess it was so impactful, it made such an impression on me, I guess because of its scale. When you're just a little person, age 3, and you're taken into this room and suddenly there's this enormous, colossal thing, and you're told that that's a blue whale and that's actually how big it is. It's overwhelming. It's spectacular. It's interesting for me now, looking back from a kind of museological perspective, to kind of overly intellectualize it, because isn't that interesting? Because it wasn't a specimen, it wasn't an artifact, it wasn't a formal museum object. It was a model. It's a big plastic model, and that's interesting for me now, because one of the things that I'm kind of researching, investigating at the moment is that fictive tradition, is that part of museum practice which is about models and imitation.
So if you keep this question in mind, maybe it could somehow help with your current practice. Because unfortunately not all the memories were so happy and fun. Some of people remember their school trips to museums, which were, to be honest, boring and traditional, of course. So this part of the research seems to be the most promising, as I think that we as museum professionals and those of us who are parents should be very careful and thinkful about the first visit to a museum, which we can organize for our audience or for our all children. Because if they like it, they can come and work here later. And I think it's great. Yes, and this nice picture from the State Historical Museum in Moscow. Another group of questions was about the technical background. So I'd like to understand, when people first came to the museum, did they have enough skills to work with computers? Because I talk to people who are now age more than 70. So when they started working in the museum, they didn't have iPads, iPhones. They worked with really big computers. But I need more data to analyze these questions, so I just leave this diagram here. And I was also hunting for interesting titles for our jobs. And this is one of my favorite, Sep Chen, who is currently working as a director of digital and emerging media. Interestingly, people who describe themselves as museum technologists do a lot of different things. And I tried to come up with a kind of general description of this profession, but I think I failed, because this term is so broad and it contains so many technologies, so it was quite difficult. But anyway, another title that was discussed yesterday, digital transformations, and now the head of the digital transformation state is John Steck. But as I understand, he is not sure what his title is include. But we can ask him afterwards. So these are just few examples of job titles that I came up with. Quite typical, and I guess that media manager or web developer could be everywhere, not just in the museum. In Russia, we usually use these acronyms, IT or ICT, which stands for Information Technology or Information and Communication Technology. And in the case of Russia, I guess that means that we are more focused on technology rather than on storytelling. You see, if we say, I don't know, media manager or IT manager, different accents. So yes, in Russia, we prefer technology rather than storytelling. So what are the duties of those who consider themselves as museum technologists? Yes, quite similar. Most of them are working with web management, social media. A few people work with collections. And that's rather interesting. That's rather interesting observation, because curators and registers who use technology, databases, collection management system, they don't call themselves museum technologists. But those who work with social media, with multimedia kiosks, etc., they call themselves museum technologists. And probably this term is not so useful, and probably we need to come up with a new umbrella term that can be focused not on technology but on the content. And why I talk about content? The next part of questions was about the future. And the next question was, what can you wish for aspiring museum professionals? I guess that those who are currently have senior positions could share the story of their success for those who just started working in the museum and give some useful advice. So this small video with some of these answers.
With a number of people wanting to work in museums and cultural institutions, I think it's extremely important that early on in your career you make a name for yourself by finding out what you really want to do, then finding the people who have experience and joining them and working with them, and in that way learning a lot on the job, as well as building a public profile.
Хотелось бы, чтобы специалисты, которые получили такую специальность, там, музейное дело, информатизацию в музейном деле, действительно пошли работать в музее. И чтобы они научились находить общий язык со старшим поколением, это очень трудно. Потому что старшее поколение относится с недоверием, с непониманием молодых. И вот этот вот разрыв, он может быть преодолен только с движением с двух сторон.
We always in the digital space look for people who are doing things even irrespective of working in a museum. You know, do your own stuff and then come to us and say, this is better than yours.
What I'd say about the museum professional, so the person who's could be still a digital heritage scholar but is seeing themselves working in museums, these are tough times for the museum sector around the world, and certainly in the UK. And the advice that we give to our students, our graduates at the moment, is, well, it has many parts to it really. First of all, we're saying be adaptive and be creative and be willing to have a mixed portfolio.
Сами средства в общем не интересны. Средства нужны для воплощения некоторых идей. Поэтому мое пожелание такое: пусть ваша инновационность и современность будет в области идей, в области содержания, в области контента, в области структур, а не в области железок. Железки умрут через полгода, а идеи могут жить долго.
Another question in this group was about the additional degree, because technology is changing so rapidly. I remember that 7 years ago I learned how to use HTML, but now it's not it's not useful anymore because I can just download WordPress and use it without any knowledge of HTML. So surprisingly, only half of respondents want to get additional education, and it's about programming skills mostly. And another half is fine with what they have now. And what was really interesting for me is that only a few people have a museological background. I have 2 museological degrees, and it's really sad. Yes, because as I can see from all these stories, the museology is not integral part of success. But let's see what I can tell you in 20 years' time, hopefully. And the final part of my questionnaire was about the future. And I asked 2 questions: how the technology has changed the museum, and which prospects museum as institution have. So yes, most of respondents think that technology has changed museum dramatically, but still there are some people who think that no, museum doesn't change, because yes, we use other tools, but the content is mostly the same, and our activities are mostly the same. Yes, we now put a kiosk near the showcase. In previous times, we put a printed paper. Is there any principal differences? I don't know. Maybe no. And so the final question, in a few words, how do you see a museum of the future? And this is my favorite answer. Luckily, most of people I talk to, they see museum as an institution in the future, and this sounds quite promising. And I sum up all these answers: that museum is a place for open information, a place to relax and getting some new knowledge, place for creativity. So mostly all these things that we are discussing today. But unfortunately, only a few people talk about the role of collections and the real object. Do you remember that we still have real object and aura of real exhibits? Yes, but when we talk about technology, we sometimes forget about these things. I like this answer from Australia, that to me the object in a museum is such a powerful thing. I would not feel comfortable in a museum that only told stories through interactives and movie screens. So perhaps we can have this in mind when we install one more 3D printer in our exhibition. And so, which conclusion do I have after 1 year working on this project? That perhaps a term museum technologist is quite good, but for the contemporary situation, and probably for the future museum professional, we might come up with a new term that will be about working with content, but not with the technology, and have this technology as a useful tool, but not as technology for technology. So I'd like to continue this discussion afterwards, and if you want to share your story, your childhood memories, and some mad predictions for the future, you are more than welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there's some interesting stories in this audience. And so next we have Martha and Tiana from the Tate.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tiana. Martha is sitting just over there. She'll join me later. So our presentation is about reshaping user experiences for multiple contexts and devices. And we're going to be talking about slightly more detail about the Tate Britain mobile guide that we've just launched this week on our website. Tate has produced a number of mobile projects and products, and I won't go into any detail about those. But Tate was also the first one who had the first Wi-Fi accessible multimedia guide, the Tate Modern, back in 2002. That multimedia guide lives still on today as a pure HTML developed few pages, and it's been updated by one web developer. So that's not a cool stuff these days. Yeah? So this week we just launched this web-optimized mobile guide for the Tate Britain displays. I will firstly tell you why we decided to go down the mobile web route, and then Marta is going to talk more about the digital production and the challenges behind that. So we both work at Tate Digital, which is this new central hub department at Tate, and we try to look after the whole digital production at Tate, which is still not happening, but will happen one day. And we tend to ask ourselves, how can Tate provide a useful and consistent content offering to visitors on different devices in a variety of contexts? But how can it be done sustainably and at a reduced cost, because we don't have a lot of money? The mobile content production at Tate has been mostly concentrated around Tate Modern, and as similar examples mentioned yesterday in the Mega Mobile session by MoMA and Guggenheim and the Met, it's fully sponsored by Bloomberg. But Bloomberg sponsors only Tate Modern, and Tate is an institution of 4 galleries. There is Tate Britain, Tate Liverpool, and Tate St. Ives. So in the meantime, none of these other galleries have enjoyed this funded paradise as Tate Modern, and they've lacked in delivery of any content on mobile. So something needed to be done. So we saw this opportunity a few months ago when we heard that obviously Tate Britain was going to be launched, and it was launched 2 days ago as a newly refurbished gallery. And you might have seen in the press in the past months that there is an almost complete lack of interpretation in the galleries, which isn't really the case. There are some wall captions, but not nearly enough as our visitors would probably like. And we already had a mobile optimized website and increasing number of website visits on mobile devices. So for example, in October 2013, we had about 25% of visitors seeing our website on tablet and mobile devices. So having that in mind, just thought, maybe we could do something for Tate Britain. And we launched this mobile guide as part of our website. So it works on desktop and on mobile. But Marta will tell you more about that a bit later. What I would like to talk about is that before we started the production, we've done a bit of research about the mobile audiences. We've done research in collaboration with Imperial War Museums and the National Gallery in London. And to us, really, it is increasingly important to say that everything we do, any digital production that happens, is done based on some kind of evidence. And we'll get there, hopefully. So this research was commissioned by 3 institutions, and there were 3 main questions. We wanted to understand the typical needs and desires of visitors to our museums and galleries. We wanted to identify in which way smartphone users interact with our content. And we also wanted to identify some set of characteristics that are typical of different groups of visitors within the context of museums and galleries. So just briefly take you through this. The slides are going to be uploaded later on, so if you don't catch up something, you don't need to take photos. So in terms of the respondents to the survey, majority were from the UK. About 43% were over the age of 55. It's worth saying that the respondents were fairly regular museum and gallery goers, with about 24% of all respondents who visited museums and galleries a few times a month, and about 51% of all respondents visited museums and galleries a few times a year. So they're our core audiences. In terms of the smartphone usage, 68% of participants owned a smartphone, and 30% had previously downloaded a museum or a gallery app. The most common motivations for visiting museums and galleries, no surprises, are the ones to do with a personal interest or hobby, improving their personal knowledge, or because it was an enjoyable way to pass their time. In terms of the type of their visits, about 1/3 visited museum and gallery alone, and all the others are visited with either friends, family, colleagues, or parts of some kind of organized group. Lots of them engage with the content in many different ways. Wall captions and printed publications, such as e-menu guides or printed guides, seem to be the most popular. Obviously, this is the only thing they would know because we don't have anything else. Of all the respondents, 20% had accessed information on their personal devices during their visit. And so we thought, this is our audience. Time is a very important factor when you think about mobile, so in offering content on the move. And this slide just shows you when the respondents are more or less likely to access our content. So no surprises there. They plan for visiting, lots more information to see before the visit, that drops during the visit and after the visit. The next 3 slides I'm going to not go into too much detail, but they show you the type of content and the type of devices that the content has been accessed on before the visit, during the visit, and after the visit. But what you will see that during the visit, you can see that about 30% of people actually take photos. No surprises as well, but important to know. And this is what they access after the visit, again, going back to their desktops. What we were really interested in, because we were planning to do a website-based mobile tour, was whether they would actually like to use their own devices. And yes, 72% said yes, we would be willing to use our own devices. 12% not sure, so we could probably make them use, and 16% said no. Why they said no? These were the reasons. The most cited ones: I'm happy with the level of engagement I have, I believe it's inappropriate, and I visit museums and galleries for a device-free experience, and so on and on. Another aspect we were curious about, which has a huge implications on what type of content we end up all creating, was the expectations for content longevity. What we found was that 22% expected to access it only short term, but 53% wanted us to create content which they could use after the visit. And we also found out that the majority would expect to access the same amount of content on their mobile device as they would on their desktop device, with 10% expecting more content on mobile device. There was still 23% which expected less content on mobile device. So this is what we found out about our audiences. We had this opportunity to create something. So Martha is now going to tell you what is that we created.
Thank you, Tiana. So as Tiana's pointed out, we have this opportunity and also a need. There is a great deal less interpretation in the gallery. But there was also quite a lot of content that one of the teams within Tate had already created, like previous audio guides, interviews with curators and so on. So it seemed obvious that doing some sort of audio guide, which we know had been used in the past, would be a good idea. We, in the past, had kind of, the methodology for doing this had been very much apps as a kind of default position, with some very good reasons for doing this. Users understand accessing content through apps in this way, particularly audio guides, they're used to doing it. There are existing platforms out there that can create really nice-looking things. This is one for a Lowry exhibition quite recently and the current Paul Klee exhibition, both done by Antenna, who we have a long-standing contract with. But we kind of wanted to see if there was something we could do that might be a bit different. And as Tiana mentioned, we have a mobile-optimized website already. This is how it looks on the desktop. And this is how it looks on mobile. So it's kind of just, so it's pretty much the same content, but just streamlined and formatted in a way that looks much better on a mobile phone. So we wanted to look at the possibility of using this website to create an audio tour. There are several good reasons for doing that, as well as potentially an app. Because we already have everything set up in Drupal and people know how to use it, there's all those in-house skills that we can use for doing that, and also for maintaining it in the future. We therefore hoped that it would be much easier to maintain, obviously not having to go to an outside agency to make any changes, and that it would also be consistent with the website, and because it was part of it. And we hoped that would mean that it was cheaper and faster to make as well. But it was always going to be a bit of an experiment. We didn't quite know how it would work or how it would look, how it would sort of all fit together. And moreover, we didn't really know how users were going to respond to doing things like that, because we weren't really sure how people feel about using the mobile web in this way, whether they'd be confused by that, whether they prefer to use apps and so on. And the first thing that we did was have a look to see what other people were doing in this area, because we thought, well, let's see what's out there and see what we can learn from doing that. And we were kind of blown away by a few examples in particular. This is the sculpture garden at the Walker Arts Centre, which actually uses GPS to locate you within the garden, and has this really nice sort of map-based interface, very, very easy to use, very clear. We thought this was really great. Didn't think we were going to be able to do it in the short space of time that we had, but it was interesting to see that someone managed to achieve that, using something which you kind of think as being mostly sort of a native functionality for iPhone with GPS. The Birmingham Museum of Art had also done similar things. I think this is actually a slightly older version. They have a new one there. MoMA had done something which was a kind of very simple mobile website audio tour. But I think that's also been changed now. And this was quite an interesting example. A website about, the comprehensive exhibition about Latin American geometric abstraction, which is very specific. But it's quite an interesting site. It's very nicely designed. And when you look at the desktop version, it's kind of used as a responsive design to sort of move stuff around and hide things in order to create this really nice looking tour. We couldn't do any of that kind of stuff. We had about 2 months from when development started to actually do this. So we realized that what we would do is we would just do like the simplest possible thing with our website, and then potentially add stuff onto it later, but also kind of use that as a bit of a prototype testing ground that meant that when we got it out there, we could see how users were responding to it, rather than investing a huge amount of time and development and money potentially if we had to go outside for that to before we even knew what people were going to feel about it. So, who here uses Drupal for their website or has used Drupal? Oh, a sigh at the front. Oh no, okay. This might be familiar. This is kind of the back end of the website. This is the tour pages that I was creating. I didn't do any of the development build. We had an in-house Drupal developer who actually created these new templates or content types that we needed to build this tour. But actually, I think one of the things sort of relating back to user experience, which I think is kind of key to remember, is that one of the reasons we were doing this is so that it would be easier to use in future, and that potentially people outside of our team would also be able to build these tours quite easily. So the user experience isn't just about the audience using it, it's about how those people who aren't necessarily, they're not Drupal developers, they just want something easy that can go in and put stuff together. So it was very important that it was streamlined in a way that worked for them. And I actually think the way it worked out is very, very easy to use. So within we had to do quite a lot of thinking in advance before we could start about how this would actually all be put together. And the way they ended up doing it is very simple, but we were trying to work out could we tag all the different tour stops and then use that tag to pull things in via search into a big list. That didn't turn out to be a particularly good way of doing it. There were various other ideas, but in the end it turned out that the easiest thing to do was we already had an audio content type or template, so we put all the audio files in, attached those to a tour stop, which was a new content type, and then bung all the tour stops in a list into a new content type, which was the overall tour. So that just involved creating 2 new templates. And it's proved to be surprising news. I mean, my personal HTML skills kind of stopped around blink tags and tables, so I'm really out of date. But for me, using this was very, very easy. And I think when we started building it, we'd left ourselves probably only a couple of weeks in total, and we were a bit nervous about how that would work. But it took 2 of us probably 2 days to put it all together, maybe even like 3-person days to put the whole tour together. And we got faster and faster as it went. It was really, really easy to use. Still a few quirks, there always are with these things, but very, very simple. So that's the tour stop page. This is the tour. You can see you start typing it and it fills in with the name of the title, and you just bung them all in, and that took no time at all, really. So the finished tour. I'm not expecting to sort of blow anyone's mind with the design on this, but it was sort of deliberately very simple. Our front-end designer did do a bit of extra work on trying to, tweak some bits of it, but we didn't have much time, so it was kept simple, and we were very pleased to see that it actually looked pretty good, we thought. Let me just see if I can open up the actual tour. I don't know what's going to happen when I do this. This is going to be interesting. I just want to show you what it actually looks like on the desktop as well. So this was the other bit that because it's part of the website, and it does actually, the individual pages will actually appear within the search. There's a chance that somebody could sit at home and do this as well. We're not really expecting people to do that, but you never know. So this is how it looks on the desktop. If you want to open it now, it's www.tate.org.uk/TB tour, so you can see what it looks on mobile there. So if I go to this famous Hogarth painting, A Painter and His Pug. And then we already had this player that was already part of the
This painting shows the self-portrait of Hogarth, considered by many to be a founding father of the National School of British Painting.
So you can see you can filter by room and artists. That all seems to work pretty well. It all plays within the browser on mobile, which was another thing that was really important, because when we'd seen this being done elsewhere, when you sort of click on the audio, it tries to download it or open up a new app in order to play it, and that just felt a bit clunky. But we didn't know whether that was going to happen with ours, but we were pleased to see it just seemed to work really well. But there were still, there were lots of challenges with it, but I still think that actually the whole process was remarkably smooth. I was always, all along the way, I was just waiting for that moment where someone would go, "Oh no, that's the thing we didn't think of, that's the deal breaker, this isn't going to work." And I think we were all a bit nervous, but then it all did. But still, there was quite a lot of thinking that we had to do about how to fit this new structure in with the existing structure of the website. There were lots of things that we didn't think about, inevitably, like, hang on a minute, do we need to put our sponsor logo in here? Where does that go? Those kinds of things that sort of popped up along the way. Or if somebody's accessing on the mobile, then, will the breadcrumb work? Or do we need like another back to thing here at the bottom? So there were tweaks that we had to make along the way. We only had 2 months. That was a very squeezed schedule for development. Testing it was quite difficult because we built it on local servers, and that there wasn't an easy way of accessing it on a mobile until it was actually published right at the end. And I'm sure this will be familiar to people, was the quality of the in-gallery Wi-Fi was out of our control. It's in there, it works, it covers the whole gallery, but at the last minute when we were testing it, we realised it kind of kept kicking you off at points along the way, which was kind of painful. And I think that might have been a tweak that they've now solved. But those kinds of things, people say test along the way, and it's easy to say, but it's like until you have the actual thing, it's not always easy to do. But we did make a decision. You'll notice that I haven't talked about user testing it along the way. We made a decision not to do that, because firstly, the website itself had been tested whilst it was being developed, and had recently gone through a user testing period just for the mobile version. So we were confident that because we weren't changing much, that would work. And the format for audio tours is pretty well established, so we felt that people would just kind of understand that. So we did testing to make sure that it worked technically, and we will do some evaluation afterwards. But actually, I think probably one of the most important things that we're testing is not necessarily the audio guide itself, but the messaging around it. And this was something that that I was keen to kind of get in there from the very beginning, was making sure that people knew how to find it. So this is the information board. So this is when you come into Tate Britain, you get this, and you probably can't read it, but it basically says log on to Tate Wi-Fi for the mobile guide. Now the reason why we did it that way was because we were also doing at the same time via antenna an iPhone and Android version. So the messaging around that could still potentially be a bit confusing. You're saying to people, do you want the mobile guide, go here. Do you want the Android version, go here. Or the iPhone version, do this. It's still going to be interesting to see how people understand that, whether the mobile guide is the right term for it, or those kinds of things. But we felt if we said to people, just sign on to the Wi-Fi and then we'll redirect you to a page where all of that's on, that might hopefully work. So, but yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. So it's launched. As you can see, it's on your site. We've got a survey on it, so hopefully we'll get some results from that soon. But unfortunately, I don't have anything to tell you now about how well it's working, apart from the fact that we don't seem to have had any complaints, which is good. The other thing I should say about the benefits of doing it in Drupal was that it means that it's already integrated into our analytics. So we can see those analytics, and we'll be able to get a sense of who's using it, or how much it's being used, and the survey will tell us a bit more about who. We can see the comparison between that and the app. This is the antenna version, which is on the iPhone, and the idea will be that if this works well, we can roll it out to the other galleries. And because it's been so easy and cheap, like the galleries that, as Tiana pointed out, don't have those same funding, we'll be able to do this pretty straightforward fashion. There will still be the costs associated with creating content, but it won't be about the back end. We'll need to do some training in order to make that work, and we need to think about some maintenance aspects. So what do you do if a work goes off display? That kind of stuff doesn't happen automatically within this system, so we need to actually come up with some processes to make sure that works internally. And finally, the last thing that we wanted to do, and that wasn't part of this, was just for accessibility reasons, adding some transcripts on. So we need to find a way of doing that so it doesn't work really clunkily. So that's us. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who worked on it.